everyone. This is my first educational video on my channel, The Junior Games. So today I'm going to be explaining and reading and explaining the chapter, the 3 questions from the 7th grade NCERT book. So I'm going to be starting from before you read. Before you read, a king has 3 questions and he is seeking answers to them. What are the questions? Does the king get what he wants? 3 questions. This is the chapter's name, the 3 questions. The thought came to a certain king that he would never fail if he knew 3 questions. 3 things. These 3 things were: what is the right time to begin something? Which people should he listen to? What is the most important thing for him to do? What is this paragraph is all about that a thought came to a certain king that ruled a kingdom. He thought that if he knew 3 things, then he would never fail in his life. And the 3 things were: what is the right time to begin something, which people should he listen to, and what is the most important thing for him to do. So therefore the king therefore sent messengers throughout his kingdom, promising a large sum of money to anyone who would answer these 3 questions. Many wise men came to the king, but they all answered his questions differently. In reply to the first question, some said the king must prepare a timetable and follow it strictly. So till here, what all this means is that the king had sent his messengers of his palace throughout the kingdom which he ruled, and whoever would answer these 3 questions, he would give them. He's promising to give them a large sum of money. Then many wise men had come to the king, but they answered these questions differently. For the first question, some said to prepare a timetable and follow it strictly. Only in this way, they said, he could he do everything at its proper time. Others said that it was impossible to decide in advance the right time for doing something. The king should notice all that was going on, avoid foolish pleasures, and always do whatever seemed necessary at the time. Yet others said that the king needed a council of wise men who would help him act at the proper time. This was because one man would find it impossible to decide correctly without help from the others. The right time for every action. So, what all of this means is that the people said that he should prepare a timetable and follow strictly, so he could do everything at the proper time. But the others then others said that it's impossible to decide in advance the right time for doing something. The king should notice all that was going around, and he should do whatever seemed necessary and avoid the foolish pleasures. Yet some other people had also said that the king needed the counsel of wise men, because because one person will find it impossible to decide correctly without the help from others. But then others said that some things could be urgent. These things could not wait for the decision of the council. In order to decide the right time into doing something, it is necessary to look into the future. And only magicians could do that. The king, therefore, would have to go to magicians. What this paragraph means is that the other people said that the king should, the king, it's impossible. Wait. Some things were which could be urgent, and the king could not wait for the advice of the council. So, to decide something at the right time, the king has to look into the future. So, that only magicians could do that. So, the king would therefore have to go to magicians. In their answers to the second question, some people said that most necessary to the king was counselors. Others said the priests. A few others chose doctors, and yet some others chose that soldiers were the most necessary. To the third question, some said science, others chose fighting, and yet others chose religion worship. So, for in this context, The people for the second question, they gave the answer that the people that were most necessary to the king were his counselors. So some others said the priests were the most important, and the few others chose doctors, and then the others also chose soldiers, which were the most necessary. And for the third question, some people said science is the most important, and then others chose worship, and then the others also chose religious worship. Excuse me. As the answers to his questions were so different, the king was not satisfied and gave no reward. Instead, he decided to seek advice of a certain hermit who was widely known for his wisdom. A hermit means a person who lives alone in and leads a simple life. The hermit lived in a wood. I think it should say the hermit lived in the woods, which he never left. He saw no one but simple people, and so the king put on ordinary clothes. Before he reached the hermit's hut, the king left his horse with his bodyguard and went on alone. So, what these two paragraphs mean that all of the answers to his three questions were so different, and the king was not satisfied. Then he gave no reward. So then he decided to seek the advice of a certain hermit who was widely known for his wisdom. That hermit lived in the woods, and he never left those woods. And he saw no one but simple people. And so the king thought that he could dress up as a simple person, and then he put on ordinary clothes and reached. Then he set for the hermit's hut. But then, before he reached it, left his horse with his bodyguard and went on alone. As the king came near the hermit's hut, he saw the hermit digging the ground in front of his hut. He greeted the king and continued digging. The hermit was old and weak, and as he worked, he breathed heavily. The king went up to the hermit and said, I have come to you, wise hermit, to ask you three questions, to answer three questions. What can I learn to do the right thing at the right time? Who are the people I need most? What are the affairs? What affairs are the most important? The hermit listened to the king, but he did not speak. He kept on digging. You are tired, said the king. Let me take your spade and work in your place. So, what all this means is that the king then continued on to the hermit's hut. He continued digging. He continued walking without his bodyguard and her horse. So then, when he came near the hut, he saw that the hermit was digging the ground in front of his hut. He greeted the king and then continued his work. The hermit was really old and weak, as you can see in the picture. He's really old. And then he worked. When he was working, he was breathing heavily. So then the king went up to the hermit and said that he had come to him, wise hermit, so that he could answer three questions. Then what is the right time to do something? What are the people? Who are the most important people, and what affairs should he listen to the most? The hermit had listened to the king, but he did not speak. He went on digging. Then suddenly the king saw that the hermit was tired and told him, You are tired. Let me take the spade and work in your place. Thanks, said the hermit, giving the king his spade. Then he sat down on the ground. When the king had dug two beds, he stopped and repeated his questions. The hermit gave no answer but stood up, stretching his hand out for the spade, and said, Now you rest, let me work. The king did not give him the spade and continued to dig. What this means is that the after the king told him that I'll let me take a spade and do the work in your place, then the hermit had said thanks and then gave his spade to the king. Then he sat down on the ground and started digging. But after the king dug two beds, he stopped and repeated his questions. The hermit gave no answer but stood up and stretched his hand out to the king and said, "Now you give me the spade and you rest and let me work." But the king did not give him the spade, as the hermit was old and weak. Then he continued to dig. 1 hour passed, and then another. The sun went down behind the trees, and at last the king stuck the spade into the ground. I came and said, "I came to you, wise men, for an answer to my questions. If you can give me no answer, tell me so, and I'll return home." So what this means is that the after 2 hours passed, because it says 1 hour passed and then another. That means 2 hours has passed. When the 2 hours had passed and the king was continuously digging the beds, and then the sun went down behind the tree. That means the sunset was happening, and then the king finally struck the spade into the ground to fix it towards the ground so they don't lose it. And then he said to the hermit, "I have come to you, wise men, for an answer to my questions. If you can give me no answer, tell me so, and I'll return home." Then the hermit had said, "Here comes someone running." So here's a comprehension check. The first question: why did the king want to know answers to the three questions? The king wanted to know the answers to the three questions because he thought that if he knew the answer to these three questions, he thought he would never fail. Second question: messengers were sent throughout the kingdom to fetch wise men, to find answers to questions, to look for the wise hermit, to announce a reward for those who could answer the questions. So you have to tick the correct answer. And the correct answer for the second question is the fourth one, to announce a reward for those who could answer the questions. Now, on to the second part of the story. The king turned around and saw a bearded man running towards them. His hands were pressed against his stomach, from which blood was flowing. When he reached the king, he fainted and fell to the ground. The king and the hermit removed the man's clothing and found a large wound in his stomach. The king washed and covered it with his handkerchief, but the dress would not stop. The king redressed the wound until the bleeding finally stopped. So, when the hermit had told that here comes a man running, the king turned around and saw a bearded man who was running towards him. He had pressed his hand on his stomach, through which the bleeding was coming. And then when the hermit and the king removed his clothing, and no, wait. When the man came next to the king, he fell to the ground and fainted. Then, after they removed the man's clothing, they found a large wound in his stomach. The king washed it and covered it with his handkerchief, but the blood didn't stop flowing. So the king redressed the wound until at last the blood had stopped flowing. The man felt better and asked for something to drink. The king brought fresh water and gave it to him. By this time the sun had set and the air was cool. The king, with the hermit's help, carried the wounded man into the hut and laid him on the bed. The man closed his eyes and lay quiet. The king, tired by his walk and the work he had done, lay down on the floor and slept through the night. When he awoke, it was several minutes before he could remember where he was, or who the bearded man lying on the bed was. "Forgive me, the bearded man," said the bearded man in a weak voice, when he saw the king was awake. The king said, "I do not know you, and you have nothing to forgive me. I do not know you and have nothing to forgive you for." So what this means is that after the king had redressed the wound and it stopped, the man had felt better. Then he asked for something to drink, and the king brought him fresh water and gave it to him. By this time, the sun had set and the earth air was cool. So the king, with the hermit's help, had carried the wounded man into the hut's bed and laid him on the bed. The man had closed his eyes and lay quiet. The king, who was tired by his walk and the work he had done, lay down on the floor and slept throughout the night. When he awoke, it was several minutes before he could remember where he was or who strange the bearded man was lying on the bed. Then the bearded man had said to the king in a weak voice when he was awake, "Forgive me." The king didn't recognize him and said, "I do not know you and have nothing to forgive you for. You do not know me, but I know you. I am that enemy of yours who swore revenge on you because you put my brother to death and seized my property." Seized means take by force. Took by force. I knew you had gone alone to see that hermit, and I made up my mind to kill you on your way home. But the day passed and you did not return. So I left my hiding place. I came upon your bodyguard who recognized me and wounded me. I escaped from him, but I should have died if you had not dressed my wounds. I wished to kill you and you saved my life. Now, if I live, I'll serve you as the most faithful servant and will order my sons to do the same. Forgive me. So what this big paragraph means is that the bearded man was a person who swore the revenge on the king because the king had killed his brother and seized their properties. So here he knew that the king had gone alone to see the hermit, and he made up his mind. The bearded man made up his mind to kill the king on his way back home. But since the day passed and he did not return, the bearded man had left his hiding place and came upon his bodyguard, who had recognized him and wounded him. Then the bearded man who escaped from him, but if the man would have died, but the man didn't die because the king, who was his enemy, redressed his wounds and saved his life. The man had wished to kill the king, but the king had saved him. So, if the man had lived, he would serve the king as the most faithful servant and order his sons to do the same and forgive him. The king was very happy to have made peace with his enemy so easily and to have won him as over a friend. Not only forgive him, but said he would send his servants and his own doctor to look after him, and he promised to give back the man his property. So the king was very happy to have made peace with his enemy so easily and made his friend. So he not only forgave him, but he would send his servants uh, and his doctor to look after him, and he promised to give back the man his property. Leaving the wounded man, the king went out of the hut and looked around for the hermit. Before he was going away, he wished to once more to get the answers to his questions. The hermit was on his knees, sowing seeds into the beds that had been dug the day before. The king went on to the hermit and said, "For the last time, I beg you to answer my questions, wise man." So what this means is that he left the wounded man, and the king went out the hut and looked around for the hermit. When he saw him, he had wished to get he had wished once more to get his answers to questions. So when he saw him, the hermit was on his knees, sowing seeds into the beds and had the which had been dug on the day before. The king went on to the hermit and for the last time asked him, "I beg you to answer my questions, wise man." These are the same pages. I don't know why. "You have already been answered," said the hermit, still bending down and to the ground and looking up at the king as he stood before him. "How have I been answered? What do you mean?" So what this means is that the hermit told the king that he had already been answered, while he was still bending down to the ground and looking up at the king who stood before him. Then the king asked, "How have I been answered? What do you mean? Do you not see?" The hermit replied, the hermit, If you had not pitied my weakness yesterday and not dug those beds for me, you would have gone away. That man would have killed you, and you had wished would have stayed with me. So the most important time when you were digging the beds, and I was your most important man, and to do me good was your most important business. So till here, it means that the hermit, if he had not pitied his weakness yesterday, he would have left, and the man would have killed him. But since he stayed with the hermit, the and he, if he didn't stay with the hermit, the man would have killed him, and he would have wished that he would have stayed with him. And then the most important time was when he was digging the beds, and the hermit was the most important man, and to do good to the hermit was your most important business. Afterwards, when the man ran to us, the most important time when you were caring for him, because if you had not dressed the wounds, he would have died without having made peace with you. So he was the most important man, and what you did to him was your most important business. So this means that afterwards, when the man had ran to the king and the hermit, the most important time was when the king was caring for him, because if he had not dressed the wounds here, the man would have died, and he would not have made peace with the king. So when he was caring for him, he was the most important man, and doing good to him was the most important business. And um, so that was the most important time. Remember, then there is only one time that is important, and that is now. It is the most important time because it is the only time we have any power to act. What this means is that whenever there's the most important time to do something and begin something is right now. It is the only time we have the power to act to do anything. And the most necessary person is the person with you at the particular moment, for no one knows what will happen in the future, whether we meet anyone else. The most important business is to do with that person good, because we were sent in this world for that purpose alone. So what that means, and this is the last paragraph, what that means is that the most necessary person is the person with you, and your most important business is to do better, is to do good to the person that is next to you. We do not know the future and whether we'll meet anyone else, but the most important business is to do that person good. So because we were sent into the world to do that purpose alone. This story is written by Leo Tolstoy, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe if you liked the video, and I hope you know about this chapter now. So I'll see you next time. Goodbye.